Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well, ready to take on another battle.
That's right.
Stop another war. But there's been an ongoing war in Syria for a good many years now. I remember very clearly, I think it was 2011, that our president, before with the one we have now, Obama, made the declaration, Assad has to go. And we've been working at it for a long time. And there was a lot of fighting going on, and it looks like it took the Russians to take care of the ISIS, which was invited in because of the turmoil we helped contribute to.
Yeah.
But, you know, there are hundreds of thousands of Syrians, I think, have returned to their homeland. So things are better now that ISIS has been contained, at least. I still think there's a potential problem there. But right now, the announcement by the Turks is that they have to have better protection against the Kurds, and they want to have a free zone or a protective zone 20 miles wide, and make sure the Kurds don't step over that line. Mm-hmm. And their animosities have been around for a long time. And of course, we say if you do that, if you invade Turkey, you're going to have resistance. We have troops there, and having our troops involved and have them engage is like bombing Washington, D.C. Yeah. I mean, it's considered an act of war. But the troops are there, they're in danger, the Turks are determined, they have justified complaints, and yet right now, I think we're in the middle of it, and there's no easy thing. No, the Turks and the Americans met a little bit over the weekend, trying to come up with a compromise, but that doesn't look like it's happened, because I think the pervasive demand or desire on our part is Assad has to go, and I think they're getting their orders from other places. We can't allow Assad to exist. So it's a mess. It's been quiet. It's quieter now than it was a while ago. But this idea, remember Trump at one time said, we're coming home, we're getting out of Syria, and then he had to change his mind when Bolton got excited about it. So we're staying, we're there, and there's still a lot of mixed things going on, but something may precipitate. Now, if the Turks go and do what they say, then that's going to accelerate. But right now, there's a threat of accelerated violence, and yet we don't know if that's going to occur. But it's still another hot spot, even though it's a shame that it has to be a hot spot. And of course, my position and the position of the Institute obviously is, yes, there are problems. There's right and wrong on both sides probably, but it's not our moral responsibility nor our political ability, nor is it permissible under international law, nor is it permissible under our Constitution that all of a sudden we're totally responsible for these kind of problems. So as far as I'm concerned, it's an unnecessary problem that people in this country, our United States citizens, have to deal with, because even if we don't get involved in shooting at each other, we're very much involved, with supporting one side over the other, and it costs a lot of money and a lot of weaponry, and of course, this whole thing has something to do with the weapons too, where America is very angry at the Turks for doing what they said they were going to do, and bought some missiles from Russia. So that's a story we've talked about before, which is sort of a confusing thing in NATO, but they're buying weapons from their enemies. It fits our argument. What good's NATO? Pretty good argument for getting out. So why don't you explain all this to our viewers, because this might get more complex than it is today.
Well, the roots of the whole thing is that President Trump is continuing the Obama policy in Syria. This is it. The policy of backing rebels. Well, we say they're fighting ISIS. Well, the reality is we've backed rebels to overthrow Assad from 2011 on. Before that, covertly we did. So this is the fruits of following a failed policy. There's no vision. We've said this for a couple of years now. There's no vision in the Trump administration when it comes to foreign policy. Basically do the same stuff that Obama did, and where they do differ, it's for the worse, like Iran. But yeah, there is one easy way out, and that is for the U.S. to get its troops out of Syria. They're not welcome there. The Syrian troops in Florida wouldn't be welcome there. But the reality is the U.S. has kept those troops there because it's really our last little stronghold, our last little fingerhold in the country. And it's also used to stave off, to dissuade Turkey from invading, to get that buffer zone where the YPG, we call them the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, but they're the Kurds, to get that buffer zone and control that area where the Kurds are. We've armed them, we've trained them, they're dangerous, they don't like Turkey. And Turkey, because it is right next door, right over the border, and they have Kurds in Turkey, they're justifiably, I would say, nervous about this new well-armed force on its border.
Right, and they call it the YPG now, and they're people that we want to support, and that's part of the scenario that we believe is going on, is they would like to see Assad gone. It's as if peace and prosperity would invade Syria and all the problems of that region would disappear if they just got rid of Assad. And you know, it would probably be every bit as bad as what happened in Iraq. It gets worse. And look how long our goals have been attempted to pursue in Afghanistan. Everything we do, it makes it get worse. So even though it's simplistic to say, well, if you want a solution, just get out of the way.
Yeah.
Quit doing the things that we're not supposed to be doing. If it isn't working, they would have to admit that, well, how did we get rid of those terrorists over there? Yeah, especially since we were sort of helping the terrorists when they were trying to get rid of Assad. You know, that's another contradiction. So here we are. We're still in NATO. We're allies with Turkey. At the same time, we support their arch enemy, you know, the Kurds. And that is a difficult problem. It's been around a long time. And the Kurdish issue is, somebody could, as a matter of fact, I did many years ago read a book about the complexity of that region and being the Kurdish people really living in so many different countries and trying to, you know, be a unified source. But right now, this week and the next, I think there's a chance that this thing could get out of hand. But we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and the thing about this is a failed policy. It can't work. The U.S. will not overthrow Assad. The game is done. It's over. It's not going to happen. So why do we continue to hang on to a failed policy? You know, we had an article that I put up on in the Institute's website by Graham Fuller, who's a former CIA officer, pretty astute observer of international affairs. I encourage people to have a look at it. But it's about Turkey's changing role in our current era. You know, during the era of communism, Turkey was right next to the Soviet Union. It was our outpost right next to the Soviets. It was extraordinarily important. We had to keep Turkey in the Western alliance. Well, things have shifted. Turkey doesn't need the U.S. as much as it did at that time. It doesn't have a Soviet Union threatening on its border, its skirmishes. So the world is shifting. Turkey is becoming less of a NATO Western power and more of a Eurasian power. It's doing more things with Russia. Ironically, this is sped up by the idiotic U.S. interventionist foreign policy. We've driven Turkey and Russia into each other's arms on Syria. So this shift is coming. Turkey is shifting. And Erdogan, I think, has this vision of shifting Turkey. So this is something that is happening. But the U.S., again, the inability to take in new information and process it among our foreign policy elite, for the most part, is really the problem.
You know, I think your point about need is important because they don't need it as much, but this may be a reflection of a larger picture. Maybe the erosion of our stature around the world is not quite as high as we pretend it is, that we are the richest and the most powerful and we always win wars. And we don't win wars. We just get in wars and drain our wealth. And even these wars are based on fiat money. We just print more money, which puts a greater burden on the financial markets. So I would think that, you know, if you look at this, their lack of need means that here they go, we are the powerhouse and we are the military industrial complex and we want their business. And Turkey felt strongly enough to buy something from Russia But I think your point, geography, is pretty important. And what about the base that Russia legitimately has in Turkey? And so I think this is a sign of an erosion of our prestigious position around the world. But sometimes reaction to people who get pushed and still have a lot of power, that sometimes is they have to. We cannot look weak. We've heard that all the time.
Yeah.
Do not look weak. And sometimes we hear statements coming from the White House, and they say, "Don't worry, he's not about to invade anybody, but he has to look strong, and he doesn't mind. Trump doesn't mind." Expressing himself, look strong, but not plan to have boots on the ground.
Yeah, and you could have a scenario there because there are Turkish-backed rebels that the U.S. has also been friendly with, and they signed up for this Turkish invasion of northern Syria. They said, we're all for it because they're Arabs. So you have a situation where you have rebel fighting rebel in northern Syria, and this just goes to show what a disaster this policy has been, and they continue. And just when you think there is a way out, you said earlier, there's not really an easy way out. There's only one easy way out, which is to pull the troops out and give up on a bad policy. But when Trump, I think, starts thinking that, that's when the media, that's when the think tanks, that's when the neocons start ginning it up. There was a piece in the Military Times this morning, Colonel McGregor sent over to me, ISIS now on the move in Syria. There's flare-ups of ISIS, So this is going to be used as an excuse. We can never get out. We can never get out of Syria.
No, they will stir it up. And I do think that people who make money off war or, just talking about war, the weapons industry, they're very much in charge in Washington, which we've talked about a whole lot. And loss of a contract is a big deal, and that's what's happening. So this is really an offense to a lot of people who make a lot of money. Although Syria is not seen as an oil country, it's seen as a strategically important country for oil because a lot of the oil east of Syria or southeast of Syria could come and go toward Europe and all. Iraq wants to, and Iran would like to sell oil to Europe, and the Europeans want it. But once again, who's stopping them? I don't think that's the consensus of the people. Iran wants to sell it. The Europeans would like to have it.
Yeah.
And why is it that we go 6,000 miles away and make this a litmus test for sanity? That if you don't support our policy, then you have to be insane and not willing to be supportive of American policy. And of course, you described it pretty well. America's policy should change.
Yeah. Well, Mark Esper, the new defense secretary from Raytheon, sponsored by Raytheon, he's warned Erdogan, he's warned the Turks, he said, we will, quote, thwart any Turkish invasion of Syria. And I would say from what it looks like, Erdogan's response is, oh yeah, what are you going to do? He strikes me as someone who is not about to bluff and bluster. He wants to take that, and there's really no solution. There's no solution for the U.S. because it backs its rebels. All the other rebels we backed have turned out to be Al-Qaeda and ISIS based. So these are our last stronghold, or these Kurds, the last people we have left. And I think what will happen ultimately, and it's happened to the Kurds time and time again, they always sign off to the wrong horse. They will be abandoned by the U.S. and they will find themselves at the wrong end of a Turkish gun. It is an inevitability. It's just a matter of how long will it take for this to happen?
This has to be awful frustrating to those in our administration that says you can do everything by threats and innuendos and use bombs and missiles and financial controls, and they'll be obedient to what we want. But when it comes to this, they can't achieve that. You really have to have troops to combat what could happen here, because nobody seems to think that there's much likelihood that all of a sudden we're going to start sending 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 troops to go over there and invade Iran. We're not going to do that. I think we'd even have trouble defeating Maduro.
Yeah.
Mainly because there's a lot of people there that would be very unhappy and are unhappy with our policy. But it's just sort of tough for me to look at this and see it and be saddened that our country does this and think, the answer is so simple.
Yeah.
we don't need this. And it's like, what are they going to? What is it going to take? And I believe the answer is finally going to be when we no longer that we're bankrupt morally and bankrupt financially. And I think that is what I anticipate will happen, and then our policies will change. And most people think that, if the end of our empire comes, that it will be very, very violent. But then I think about 1989, 1990, it was like a miracle.
Yeah.
The fact that Gorbachev and Reagan were able to, put things together and lead the way and say that they just quit. The Russians, part of the Soviets, they just marched home.
Yeah.
And they were broke, and nobody. Gorbachev, some people don't give him any credit, but I sort of think that, a more violent person might have just launched a few bad bombs to make a point.
Yeah.
But so empires can end, and I don't think the empire has offered the average American citizen anything beneficial. They say, well, no, you get cheap oil and all this other kind of stuff. You get prestige. But no, the average American doesn't. We get retaliated against, and I've made the point that we got retaliated on 9/11. And guess what? The American people woke up and the government woke up, and they were going to punish the people for this. So they punished the American people by destroying civil liberties and making us go through TSA and all these things. So it's wrong policy, and that's your point. And so keep describing that proper policy.
And, as you say, they were broke. They did have to go home. I'm sure the troops were happy to get home. But then they had a good decade or so of misery. Remember, misery in Russia, poverty. The life expectancy went way down. And it really wasn't until 10 or 15 years or so that they've started, you've seen the numbers starting, the GDP, the salaries, the life expectancy going up. So, if this is the scenario for us, it's going to be a nasty one. Well, Syria is a poster child for why interventionism is a disaster and is always a disaster. We have an insane situation where we're facing off with our NATO ally, potentially shooting at each other. We've got our rebels going at their rebels, and meanwhile, the country has been decimated for 8 years because we wanted to change the government there, and we won't. It will fail. It's just a matter of how much time. It's terrible. It's a disaster. However, for us non-interventionists, for you who are joining us and the Ron Paul Institute, this is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to make the case for interventionism. People are starting to wonder, this is failing, this is no good. Trump, where are you? You said we're not going to do this anymore. This is our opportunity to make the case, to make ourselves known. And that's one of the reasons I bring it up every day, just because it's so important. We need you to be there with us in Washington to make that case. There's media interest in the conference. People are interested in what we have to say. This is our opportunity. So go to ronpaulinstitute.org/conference. Join us August 24th. It's going to be a great crowd. We're going to be breaking Washington's addiction to war. And we need you there. We want to see you there. Meet like-minded people, and let's get this revolution started.
Very good. And I hope to see a lot of people there shortly, in a couple weeks. But the solution is, and Daniel has already mentioned, just bring troops home. Just come home. And I remember so well, during the first decade, in the early part of the second decade of this century, that when I would make statements like that, they would take it and twist it and say, "You don't support the troops. You don't support the troops." And it's the most foolish statement we've ever heard. Because if we would have had a non-interventionist foreign policy from 2000, or even prior to that, but 2000 on, can you imagine how many thousands, if not millions, of lives would have been spared? How many people, how many American soldiers have died over this? How much money was spent? And no more stability, the invasion of our civil liberties. It's just tragic that the solution was so, available even then. And yet we still don't seem to learn a lesson. We elect a president that said that war was senseless and we need less wars. And even Obama was, even after 8 years, they thought he was pro-peace. They didn't even look at what he was doing in Syria. But I think the troops need to come home. That would be the great symbolism that we would be looking for. But the other thing that we could do, just to remove any hint that we have some type of an obligation, just get out of NATO. It was there to defend ourselves and the Europeans against the Soviets. And we didn't need it then, we don't need it now. So it's time we change the foreign policy, that of non-intervention, bring the troops home, and get out of NATO. Well, thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.